for the last 20 years, Republicans and Democrats just don't want to play nice together. They don't want to work together on anything that's really substantive. And parental rights are very substantive, right down to the bare fabric of our culture and our society.
Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few, US Pie's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and joining me today is Michael Ramey, President of Parental Rights Foundation. Before leading the foundation, Michael served as Executive Director, and before that, spent over a decade in church ministry. He holds a degree in foreign language from Virginia Commonwealth University and a Master of Divinity with a focus on biblical languages. Michael Ramey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sheri. It's good to be here.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What's your mission at Parental Rights Foundation, and why is your work so critical, especially now?
Well, in a sentence, our mission is to defend, support, and advance the right of parents to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their minor children through research, education, advocacy, and legal representation. And the reason that's important, so important right now, is there's some confusion as to what are parental rights, the degree to which parents have rights, especially against really ultimately power-hungry government officials and agencies who think that they know better. And a lot of them mean well, but they just believe they know better than parents and that they need to assert their will on minors and on children for kids to turn out well. And we know that's not the case. So, we want to preserve the parents' rights. The parents know their child best, are the expert on their individual child. And are going to make the best decision for their child. Natural bonds of affection, as the Supreme Court puts it, lead parents to act in the best interest of their child. And so we're standing up for parents. We're standing up for families. We're standing up for children because their parents are going to serve and protect and decide for them best.
Well, that's great. I love your mission statement. It sounds a little bit like it came from one of the Supreme Court rulings. I think they decided that parents had the right to direct the upbringing of their children. So you're right on with that. We're 100% behind you, and it's an excellent work that you're doing. And there was even the recent Supreme Court decision, which I thought was just a really big win for your movement, for our movement. You want to talk a little bit about that, explain to the audience that decision?
Well, actually, there have been a couple in the last several months. Mahmoud v. Taylor was decided last June, and that one came out of Baltimore, Maryland. The court said, they were going to use particular books to teach young children a particular worldview regarding gender and sexuality and this kind of thing, even in the youngest ages. But they allowed parents to opt out. Well, so many parents opted out that the school system decided, no, this is untenable. We can't keep doing this. It's too much of an administrative headache. So we're going to remove the opt-out, which is tone deaf in a word. You've got so many parents wanting to opt out, so you're going to continue and just ignore them. So parents sued. And the Supreme Court sided with the parents that they have the parental right. They tackled a bit of the parental rights angle, but also it was largely a religious freedom case. That the schools cannot just indoctrinate the children with a belief system that the parents disagree with and that's harmful to their faith. And one really powerful thing about that case is that the parents involved, it included a Catholic couple, I believe, and a Jewish couple and a family and a Muslim family. So it's not a single faith. This wasn't a Christian case, or it was a religious freedom case, about as broad spectrum religious freedom as you could get. But they were saying the schools are trying to teach our children a viewpoint that we disagree with, and the Supreme Court said, schools, you can't do that. Government, that's not your place. Parents have the right to direct the upbringing and the education of their children, and you've crossed a line here. And then a more recent ruling, it's somewhat preliminary, is Mirabelli v. Bonta out of California. And in that one, the schools were telling the teachers that they have to keep secret from parents if a child wants to socially transition to another gender. Now, our position on that very clearly as an organization is simply this, that no government agent or agency should be keeping secrets from parents about the health and well-being of their minor child. That's very simple. So in the Mirabelli v. Bonta decision that was issued just a couple of weeks ago, the Supreme Court held that the state had violated the parents' religious freedom rights and the parents' parental rights. And they sent that back to the lower court to fix it. It's not a final. It's a sort of a preliminary injunction. There's been one lower court put a stay on the California law, and another court, the Ninth Circuit, reversed that and said, no, the law can go into effect. And the Supreme Court came back and said, no, it can't go into effect. The first court was right. The stay is now in place. Fix it. So that case can still go back to the Supreme Court if it has to for a final adjudication, which would be a few years down the road. This is not a final decision per se, but it's a very clear signal that the Supreme Court is standing with parents in that case as well.
Okay, those are two great examples of having made progress in the
Yes.
in the legal realm as far as parents' rights. But I was thinking about another one, and I could have this wrong, but it was very recent, um, where a state had banned conversion therapy, and I think the Supreme Court decided no, they could not do that. Is that correct?
That is correct. I apologize that one wasn't on the top of my brain there. It was
No problem.
uh, just last week, I think.
Right.
But it wasn't argued as a parental rights case.
Hmm.
I see where you're coming from, that certainly parents should have that right. It was argued as a freedom of speech right. And I noticed that when these laws first started to get passed 7 or 8, 10 years ago, I read one of them, and immediately I thought, well, they're not outlawing the form of the treatment. They're not saying, for instance, oh, well, you can't use electroshock therapy. Nobody was using electroshock therapy. They were just saying you can't provide this worldview in your therapy. You can say this, but you can't say that. And that is such a clear violation of the First Amendment's free speech clause. So it was argued along free speech grounds. It was decided on free speech grounds. I do think ultimately that's good for parents because those whose kids want to be free from those attractions can get this kind of therapy. And, so keeping all the options available for the parents as possible, particularly to help their children with the help that the children want. I mean, it was, pretty obvious case, I thought. And it's just a shame it takes so long for these things to go through the courts, that it took years to decide it.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. You're a wealth of knowledge. So tell us, Michael, from your perspective, how the courts and policymakers historically have treated parental rights, and what are the most pressing threats to those rights today?
Well, so how the courts have treated them historically, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. I mean, by and large, the Supreme Court has upheld parental rights to a very high standard. They've upheld them with a good level of protection, starting in 1923 with Meyer versus Nebraska, Pierce versus Society Sisters in 1925, just 2 years later. So those two cases are often quoted together and cited together and so referenced together. So the parental rights are often referred to as a Meyer-Pierce right. And that's, the right of parents to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children as a fundamental right. And as recently as 2000, the Supreme Court in Troxel versus Granville also upheld parental rights as a fundamental right, citing Meyer versus Nebraska, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, and several other cases along the way. But here's where the mixed bag comes in, because in the Troxel court, the Supreme Court said parental rights are a fundamental right, but inexplicably they failed to give them what's called strict judicial scrutiny protection, which is that only a governmental interest of the highest order, only a compelling governmental interest that can't otherwise be served, is sufficient to override a fundamental right. This is true for your freedom of speech. It's true for freedom of religion. It's true for every fundamental right. And yet in Troxel v. Granville, while claiming parental rights to be fundamental, right up there with the others I just listed, they didn't note strict scrutiny protection in a case that involves parental rights. So that created a lot of confusion. So these two cases that I just mentioned before are very promising in that they demonstrate that the court is on a solid trajectory to get back to solidifying parental rights, not only as fundamental in name only, but fundamental in practice as well. But what's happened in the interim is that roughly 38 state Supreme Courts, citing Troxel, have said parental rights are a fundamental right according to the Supreme Court. And in our state, a fundamental right demands strict judicial scrutiny. So this is good for 38 states. But for about 12 states, the Supreme Courts in those states said the court in Troxel has held that parental rights are fundamental, but it did not demand strict scrutiny, so neither do we. So in about a dozen states, parental rights, even if you appeal all the way up to your state Supreme Court, are not guaranteed that same level of protection as every other fundamental right. And so how your right is applied may be kind of watered down. And that gives the government more power, over you. Now, in terms of policymakers, that's also really a mixed bag. Some states are working very hard to try to protect parents, preserve family autonomy. But some are not. Of course, the public schools largely are notorious for not. They're full of experts, and experts tend to believe that they know better. They've spent, years in college and postgraduate school learning that they know better and why they know better. And they lose track of the sight that it's your child, not theirs, and you were with your child, every hour for the first 5 years of their life, and you know that child better than these experts do. They may be experts in children, they're not experts in your child. And so particularly in the schools, but not only in the schools, with medical establishments as well. And I recognize most medical establishments are not government, but they tend to be backed by government policy and so forth that allow medical establishments, medical providers to also overreach into the family sphere and make decisions that really should be reserved for parents.
Amen. Very well said. And, as far as medical institutions not being government, they certainly are moving that way in South Carolina. Our Medical University of South Carolina, which is primarily state sponsored, has bought up most of the practices around our state and have a bit of a monopoly. It's beyond me how we've allowed that to happen, but there it is.
Let me throw in that
Sure.
in that instance, where this, well, and I should have thought of this too. I'm a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University, and that's connected with Medical College of Virginia, or MCV, which is a state school. It's part of the state-funded university, and therefore that whole hospital system is a state actor and should be restrained by the Constitution and constitutional provisions, including respect for parental rights. And a lot of times they're not, but they should be, even beyond what a private hospital might be.
Good point. Yes. So we need to take a short break, but when we come back, I'd like to talk to you about how model legislation works. We've seen some of that on your website. So don't go away. I'll be back with my interview with Michael Ramey right after this.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. USPI's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and today I'm joined by Michael Ramey, president of the Parental Rights Foundation. So something your foundation focuses on and is developing is model legislation, which I referenced before the break. So can you tell us a little bit about your model legislation and some of the bills that you've modeled for states?
The way a model works, it's not the language that, for instance, a South Carolina lawmaker would use to pass a bill, but it's a lot of the language. It's like we did most of the homework, and they've got to fill in a few blanks and put their name on it. submit it, and then it becomes a bill. Then it becomes legislation. But at our stage, it's a policy, and we've done the work of sorting out the language so that, first of all, it protects parental rights as they've been recognized by the courts. So legislation, one of our models would, whether it's explicitly or implicitly, would recognize and treat parental rights with that high respect that the courts call for, which is the least we can do for natural God-given rights, like parental rights. So, so we do that, and another benefit that we do in working the language, not just in making it accord with the courts and the highest respect for parental rights, but we also vet it across the aisle. So most of the models on our website have been adopted by the American Legislative Exchange Council, which is a conservative group of Republican state lawmakers. And yet it was vetted before it went to ALEC through some legal scholars on both sides of the aisle. And the benefit of that is not so that we taint it with a slanted worldview or something like that, but rather that we can take out the wrinkles. Because what happens a lot of times with folks on the right or on the left, either side of the aisle writes a bill, they think that it's innocuous, that it's neutral, that it should be bipartisan, but the way they've worded some detail throws up a red flag on the other side. So our coalition partners on the left help us to recognize those red flags and find a different way to word it that is still faithful to parental rights, still going to have the same benefit, still going to accomplish the thing that we've set out to do without raising red flags on their side of the aisle. And we do the same for them and note the red flags that the right will see that the left might miss. So one of the examples is we have a model bill called confidential reporting. So in 48 states, it is legal, or at least in practice, it is allowed to make an anonymous call to the child abuse hotline. And this gets abused, as you might imagine, quite often. So, for instance, in a nasty divorce, folks have figured, this is the classic example. In a nasty divorce, folks have figured out that their divorce is going through family court. Well, right down the hall from their judge in the same family courtroom can be a child abuse investigation. So if they if they make an anonymous accusation against their ex, then they don't even have to say anything. The judge is going to hear about it through the family court and find out that, well, dad has been accused of abuse. So I don't want to give dad all this visitation time. I want mom to have the bulk of it, or vice versa. And it's not just the moms that do it, it's the dads do it too. And in 48 states, you can do that. You can make an anonymous call to a child abuse hotline and get at least start an investigation and raise a bunch of questions, even with no evidence whatsoever. So our bill requires, our model would require that the caller has to leave their name and identifying information. Now, that's not going to be given to the person you're calling on. So, if you're a petite homemaking mom living next door to a big man with anger issues, you don't need to be afraid to call that in because they're not going to give him your name. But it does require that you leave them your name. And that way, those bad actors, those people who are trying to weaponize the system for their own ends, not to root out child abuse, but to punish or correct or abuse themselves, a neighbor or an ex or a family member they disagree with, those people have to give their name. And in a lot of instances, the first time they have to give their name is going to be the last time that they'll call, because they don't want to be found out. But those who persist in it, the system will be able to identify them and say, this is the fourth time this person has called and it's never been anything. And they start to suspect the caller rather than the person being called in on. So that's a model bill that we present. Again, it went through that vetting process on both sides of the aisle. And actually, 2 states have now adopted a form of confidential reporting, and they are Texas and New York, which is not a pairing you would expect. But that's part of the beauty of what we do. And how we do it.
Well, that is very interesting, especially the strategy that you explained for the red flags. That sounds like a brilliant strategy, and it's interesting that you have that kind of a relationship where you can help one another with crafting your bills. So, very interesting approach. So, so what are some of the key things that states should do, or policies that they should adopt to ensure that parents have the authority over their children that they deserve?
I want to point to, just as an example, one other of our models, and I'm answering this question, not the last one, I promise. And we
Hmm.
have a model school board referendum, not a referendum, I'm sorry, a model school board resolution on our website as well. And so this is an example of good policy that states or that localities can do. Is this is a resolution where the school board would declare its recognition of parental rights as they've been upheld by the Supreme Court, as they're founded in nature, and most school boards are not going to acknowledge that it's an institution created by God, but they can still acknowledge the same truth in different words, as a natural right, or even if they're shy of that, they can at least acknowledge that the Supreme Court has upheld parental rights through the decades, and and then they can resolve that the schools in our district are going to respect parents and are going to uphold parental rights and are going to stand with parents and keep parents in the loop. Related to that, I think a law or legislation that makes clear, like I said at the top of the episode, that no government official and no government agency should be keeping secrets from parents about the health and well-being of their minor children. I think that's just a common sense legislation that every state should adopt, and as common sense policy that every state agency should adopt. Now, I mean, there are those rare instances, for instance, in a case of child abuse or maltreatment where there's evidence and reason to suspect a particular parent is abusive. Then during the course of that investigation, of course, the police, the child welfare agency may keep a few secrets there, so that the abusive parent doesn't go off or snag their kids and run away or whatever it might be. But the vast majority of parents are not abusive parents and are not harming their kids in any way. And our state agencies need to recognize that and put parents first through their policies. So they need a policy, for instance, opposite of the California law that got in trouble in Mirabelli v. Bonta, that told school teachers they have to keep secrets from parents. No, they need one that says, look, if a child is struggling with their identity, with their gender or sexual orientation, or their feeling of inadequacy in terms of their intellect, or whatever the student might be struggling with, we got to let the parents know. We got to trust the parents, because unless there is a specific reason to be concerned about this parent, then you got to trust parents in general, that they want what's best for their children, and they know better than you do what's best for their children. So let them in on it, let them know what's going on, and let them help.
Gosh, it seems like such a fundamental truth that everybody should just be fully aware of. It's just so sad that we even have to develop policies like this to trust parents, because what you're talking about in the example you gave are mental health issues. And health issues are obviously the parental authority and not the education system. So the waters have definitely been murkied, and that's the reason that you have the organization and you're trying to draw the line in the sand and make it plain what should be plain to everyone. It's just absurd that we're even having this discussion, but it's true. It's so apparent. I hear about it all the time with the work that we do. Parents, truth being hid from parents. I interviewed one gentleman from Rhode Island where a parent didn't learn until I think 3 years after the child had already been transitioning. The girl would leave the house dressed like a girl and then change her clothes at school and be a boy. And the school was referring to her as her male name. And the mother sadly learned about it in the emergency room after her daughter had tried to commit suicide. So I mean, that's an extreme case, obviously, but it is clearly a mental health issue. And thinking that somehow parents can't be trusted to do what's best for their child is just really a sad phenomenon in our culture today. So, so parents that want to be proactive, that are concerned about what they're hearing today on the podcast, What are steps that they can take to make sure that their parental rights are protected?
First thing I think is really get to know your kids, stay in touch with your kids, know what's going on in their life, know the things that they're going through, so that you can advocate for them, because that's really what parental rights are. It's the right to be your child's advocate and not have to hand that over to a government agent who doesn't know your child so well. So that's a starting point. That's a right there at home thing you can do. I would also point to, again, the models on our website. Look those over and find out your state law, whether your locality has a school board resolution supporting parental rights. You can start there locally. And then you can look to your state. Does your state have the state laws that would protect parental rights in particular areas like anonymous reporting, or another is essentially family Miranda, we call it unofficially, which is where CPS has to tell parents their rights at the beginning of a child abuse investigation, and laws of that sort. So check into that, check into the laws in your state, and then you can take our model to your state lawmaker and say, hey, would you be interested in running this in the next legislative session? Our model allows you to take language to them, which puts you 2 steps ahead. They'll have to edit it. They'll have to adapt it to the particular state. They might change, the chapter and title of the law that's going to go in. They might change a phrase here or there to match the wording that's consistent in your state's laws. But essentially, the work is done for them, so that they can just take that and launch a legislative effort in your state to protect parental rights. So that's another thing that I would encourage people to do.
Okay, so before we go to another break, I was very intrigued by what I saw on your website about a constitutional amendment for parental rights. Can you talk to us about that?
Absolutely. So the Parental Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, that was actually the impetus that started the organization back in 2007 under the name parentalrights.org, which still is the website for that Parental Rights Amendment. And what this amendment does is, without trying to define parental rights or give a clear, detailed, these are things that are and these are things that are not, it takes language from existing Supreme Court precedent, and it says that parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing, education, and care of their children. And then it's Section 1. And then Section 2 says that neither the United States nor any state shall infringe this right without demonstrating that its governmental interest as applied to the person is of the highest order and not otherwise served. And that's a lot of legal terms of art, a lot of it pulled from other Supreme Court cases, that comes down to this, that strict scrutiny protection that we talked about earlier applies. The Troxel case, where they took away that protection, or they just kind of didn't apply that protection while still calling parental rights fundamental, that's what sparked the Parental Rights Amendment movement in the first place. We wanted to correct that and say, okay, yes, parental rights are fundamental. Yes, we want to uphold the Supreme Court's tradition and precedent there, but we also want to apply the same high level of protection and scrutiny that other fundamental rights get and that parental rights should have. So we've initiated this effort to pass a parental rights amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And today, a benefit of that, if we can pass it, would be that states like California and Massachusetts and New York, where parental rights are routinely trampled on, would still benefit from a parental rights amendment. It has to be adopted by 2/3 of the U.S. House, 2/3 of the U.S. Senate, and then it would go to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to adopt it. Well, that's 38 states, which means that 12 states that would never support parental rights, that are too far in the direction of government tyranny and government control, the parents in those states could also be protected now through a parental rights amendment to the Constitution. So that's what that's about.
Interesting breakdown of numbers. I had to recall that you said that there are currently 38 states that have good policy and then 12 that don't. So it looks like we could have the numbers to pass something like that if it comes to
Right.
ratification.
Yeah, it's been my take, my experience and opinion thus far, that the biggest challenge is not so much in the states. I think we could get the support in the states. I think the
Right.
biggest challenge is in Congress because for the last 20 years, Republicans and Democrats just don't want to play nice together. They don't want to work together on anything that's really substantive. And parental rights are very substantive, right down to the bare fabric of our culture and our society is the family and family autonomy and parental rights. Parents, the right and the obligation, two sides of the same coin, to take care of their children and raise them in freedom. Um, and Congress just doesn't tend to play well and work together on that. So that's the real struggle, is getting it through Congress.
Well, I would have to agree with that. And wouldn't you say it's primarily the Democrats that have this weird concept that state knows better than parents?
That's been largely my experience, and it's crazy because I am in this coalition with partners on both sides of the aisle,
Right.
and the folks I work with, they get it. They want the government to leave parents alone,
Mm.
to leave families alone, and keep children where they're safest, which statistically is with their parents, except in those really abusive situations, and there are some of those, and we recognize that. But the vast majority of parents are good parents if we let them be, and if we stay out of the way. And even the Democrats in the coalition, they get that, but then their lawmakers seem to say, "Yeah, I get it too," but then they're not signing on to things like the Parental Rights Amendment. So
You think that has to do with lobbying and money, big money?
you, I well, I th- I think that's got to be a piece of it. Because when you stop and consider who benefits from the idea, it's a fake idea, but the
Right.
idea that teenagers are going to make their own decisions. Um, Teenagers do make their own decisions every day, but teenagers are not permitted to make legal decisions because our law is founded on the recognition that teenagers, and especially children, are not yet ready to make decisions they're legally bound for. And you can track it back hundreds of years to this progression of recognizing that we're protecting children and we're protecting adolescents by not making them legally responsible for their own decisions. That's why parents have to make those decisions. But there are those who are big government and so forth who want to promote this idea that, oh, we're letting the kids decide for themselves, we're giving them autonomy, which is true as long as they use that autonomy to decide the things that those people want them to decide. So for instance, a few years ago, right after COVID, when parents started to be more concerned over vaccines, there were a number of localities and states that were passing laws allowing younger children to make their own decision to get a vaccine. But interestingly enough, none of them would allow that child to override their parents' decision if the child wanted to not get a vaccine. It's only one way. So if the parent says we don't vaccinate, but the child says, no, I want this vaccination, there are localities that say, well, if you're 13 and up, 14 and up, whatever it is, then you can consent to that. But if the parent says, well, we want to vaccinate our child, and the child says, no, I'm not okay with that, the same localities do not allow the child to opt out. So you stop and you have to look at where the money is involved. And I'm not saying it's all money, but there are some big money players who can take advantage of adolescent or child autonomy to allow the child to make the decision that they want the child to make.
Yes, there's a huge money making industry in the mutilation of children or transgender surgeries, whatever you'd like to call it. But I've done quite a bit of research on that, and it's a huge money making industry. So there's definitely money to be made on the lies that are being told to children and trying to usurp the parental authority. So we need to take another short break, but when we come back, I'd like to ask you two questions that we ask all our guests before closing the show. Don't go away. I'll be back with Michael Ramey right after this. Formal grade level standards and standardized assessments have only become widespread in recent decades. Historically, parents and educators guided children's learning based on natural developmental stages. While historically most children could read by the end of third grade, today only about 1/3 of fourth graders meet reading proficiency standards. Well-crafted standards can provide helpful guidance, but rigid application often ignores the unique pace and needs of each child. Furthermore, overemphasis on standardized testing can cause stress and detract from meaningful learning experiences. U.S. Parents Involved in Education encourages a balanced approach that respects individual differences and prioritizes real educational growth over arbitrary benchmarks. To join our movement, visit uspie.org and connect with us at USPie on Facebook and X. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I'm your host, Sheri Few, and with me today has been Michael Ramey, president of the Parental Rights Foundation. So, Michael, we like to close our show with asking two important questions. What do you think what gives you the greatest concerns about education today, and what gives you hope?
As I'm sure you understand and recognize, the aim of education is supposed to be to give students as they become adults, to give them the knowledge, the breadth of knowledge and understanding to be able to think independently and exercise their freedom, their liberty, and their self-autonomy, as it were, to make good and wise decisions and be a good citizen particularly of a nation like ours, which finds its power sources were right from the beginning at we the people. We are responsible for our nation. And instead, in the name of diversity, we see the education establishment really teaching and indoctrinating students to all think the same. So diversity means we should all look different, but we should all think the same. And that's really not good news for any for education, because that just misses the whole goal of education, of letting people think for themselves and join into the public sphere of debate and the interplay of ideas. That's real education, and that's what we want to see. Now, what gives me hope, especially since 2020, when the COVID crisis really peeled back the curtain from what was happening in a lot of our public schools and some other institutions as well, but particularly in the public schools, a lot of parents woke up, stood up, spoke up. They've been grouping together, acting out together. Just really, parents as the whole, we're seeing the whole mama bear effect of not my child. You're not going to do that with my child. And it's not my child like I own it. It's my child like this is the person I brought into the world that I'm concerned about, that I would give the last ounce of my blood for. And you are not going to take advantage of them and abuse them and put them into a box, teach them to think cookie cutter. I want better and more for my child, and I'm going to do something about it. So really the thing that gives me hope in the outward is parents themselves stepping up and making a difference for their child, and then collectively, for all of us.
Amen. And when you were talking about that, I was envisioning, some of the videos we've seen on social media of parents at school board meetings. And I like to remind people that these aren't just as the battle with Common Core, which I was involved with heavily. We were, what do they call us? Soccer moms. It was just the soccer moms that were involved with this. And so now it's, we see it's obvious. There's white parents, black parents, Asian parents, parents from New York, parents from, the southern states. It's all over. Parents have that in common, and they have united despite their diversity, which is good. And in the interest of children and families. So it is very encouraging. I'm glad that you highlighted that. So before we close, do you want to list your website or any ways that people can connect with you and help you and support the work you're doing?
Absolutely. So the website is parentalrightsfoundation.org. And we also have a partner website, parentalrights.org, which is predominantly focused on that parental rights amendment to the U.S. Constitution. But all of our local and state level work, and the bulk of our work is at parentalrightsfoundation.org.
Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Michael, for being on the show. Keep up the good work. I'd love to hear back from you maybe, in 6 or 8 months and see how things are progressing. But we're certainly partners in this battle, and we're glad to have you on the scene and fighting for parents across the country. And
Terrific.
to
Thank
our
you so much.
Absolutely. And to our listeners and viewers, if you found today's discussion eye-opening, please share this episode with a friend, give us a 5-star rating, and subscribe to stay informed. You can connect with us on Facebook and X at USPI and visit uspie.org to join the movement. Until next time, I'm Sheri Few. Thank you for your support of USPI and our efforts to unmask government schools.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, USPI seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional USPI chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapter section.